Welcome to the Happy Recap Podcast. I'm JB along with EJ, and we are excited to have you with us on this first day of November in 2020. And it's a new month, it's a new feeling. And EJ, it almost feels like a new year. I mean, 2020 has been such a pile of crap for most of us. I think as Mets fans, outside of winning the World Series, we probably had one of the coolest days we could possibly have just the other day, as Steve Cohen is officially the new owner of the New York Mets.
When you say you're excited to have everyone along with us, I think excited is the exact word for it, my friend. We have waited for this day for far too long. We've been teased with it with another owner. We finally get it with a guy who I think is even a better suited owner than what David Einhorn would have been. It's just a really, really great time to be a Mets fan, I feel. And you're right. The other day, I've always maintained that the two best days ever on hashtag Mets Twitter were the day that the United States killed bin Laden, and the Mets were playing in Philadelphia that day. So all of a sudden became an in-game thread at the same time as a celebration of all that is good. And then the night the lights went out at the Super Bowl was absolutely one of the most hilarious nights on Twitter ever. Friday absolutely equals all of that. We were just in a celebratory mood when you're right. We have not had a ton to celebrate here in 2020, and it just felt good for a couple of hours there. I had the election was knocked off my timeline completely. I didn't see the names about either candidates. All I saw was Mets fans rejoicing, having fun with one another, and it's a universal happiness, which is something that you well know we very rarely achieve as Mets Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly, that the vote on Friday by the owners was the vote that Mets fans were waiting for, even more so than the one coming up next week, or technically this week at this point. But you look at the situation and how it developed and how it played out throughout the week. I mean, we talked about it, several times, both last week and in the midweek show that we did following the end of the World Series. You had all of these little sticky wickets thrown in the middle. Could Bill de Blasio somehow derail? No, we don't think he can. All these little things here and there. And at the end of the day, it sounds like, it was mostly a non-thing. But we look at this change, and it really is the change towards a brighter day. Because the Mets are in the hands of a fan. We know they're in the hands of a fan that cares. We know that it's a family of fans, and we'll talk a little bit about that here shortly. But so it's one of those things. It's like, what do you mean you traded my favorite player, Dad? I mean, you could have those kind of conversations. And I don't think that that's how the Wilpons really, really conducted their business. We'll talk today with our good friend Greg Prince from Faith and Fear in Flushing. He'll be joining us in a little while, and we'll talk a little bit about some ownerships of days past as we lead up to what is now the termination of the Wilpon era of Mets ownership. But the one thing that was a little surprising to me on Friday night, EJ, was discovering that not only was Mrs. Cohen a Twitter user, very quietly, so is Mr. Cohen.
That's been the most pleasant surprise of the weekend, I would say. And they are active. And it really speaks to the two different ownerships. As Fred and Jeff and Saul all take off, how do they leave? With a very lawyerly written press statement released to multiple outlets that really just did not feel like personal at all from them. Nope. It's just basically what you say as you walk out the door and turn off the lights. And in the complete opposite, you have Steve Cohen take to Twitter and get 1,500 responses to, hey, Mets fans, what do you want? Tell me what you want to see change. And not only did he put that out there, at which point he could have turned off the phone, walked away, but he continued to reply to hundreds of people on their suggestions, saying, hey, I think that's really great. That's a good idea. That's something to look into. He even took to somebody who said, I've been banned from Citi Field because said something bad about Jeff on Twitter, and it got me banned from Citi Field. And Cohen's like, oh, Buck, that is not going to happen. Buck,
fix that.
Send me your information. We got to take care of this for you, buddy. And it's just like, oh my God, we've been waiting for this guy for so long. We want, like you referenced him before, hey, Dad, how can you trade my favorite player? We have a dad. We have someone to look at it that way. And it's really been a fun weekend to be a Mets fan.
I mean, I think the reality of it is that in running a business as successful as as 0.72 or 27, I always mix that up. His hedge fund is combined with running a Major League Baseball team. Do I expect him to be 24/7 accessible to the fan and
Oh,
as
no.
interactive as he is now? No, there'll be probably months we don't hear from him, and that's okay. The reality is that we've heard from him now, and he is open to suggestion and idea, and he wants to hear from. He doesn't want to hear from the fans. He wants to hear from his fellow fans. That's the feeling I get, and it was one of those things when um, Alex, his wife, revealed herself slightly earlier than Steve did, and showed a picture of them, celebrating quietly celebrating on Friday night, and she's wearing a shirt that's as "You got to believe in Uncle Steve." And the first thing I thought to myself is, there's a lot of people on Twitter that have been calling him Uncle Steve. I guess he didn't think it was creepy because there are times I did. But his wife was wearing the shirt, so it was one of those that I look at it and I was just like, this is a whole new ball game. You would not have seen any Wilpon or any cats in a photo like that, and there was nothing wrong with the photo. It's perfectly, it's awesome. But it was not. It was not, as I would refer to the previous ownership as, it was not consistent with men in suits.
Right, right. I mean, the last time anything Wilpon related to a T-shirt came out, it was them handing out prevention and recovery T-shirts in spring training to the team, really speaking to the medical conditions that the Mets were undergoing at the time. As opposed to, I love the fact that they had to go out and have this T-shirt custom made in Mets colors for Steve and his wife. That was just great. And he's of course wearing his Mets hat. And you're right, it's just the dream was that a true fan of the team hits the lottery and is able to buy the team and do everything right by the team. Okay, it's not the lottery. It's a guy who worked hard in business, but it's just like one of ours with a whole lot of billions of dollars is now in charge.
Well, not just that, they find a fan who makes T-shirts on Etsy,
Right.
buy this shirt, and now everybody knows who this shirt maker is. And I'd like to think there are more than one quote unquote renegade shirt maker, if you will, out there. And and they made sure that everybody knew who made that shirt. He got full credit, and I'm sure a lot of orders, because a lot of people really like that shirt. And I tell you, it's one of those things. It seems like they're willing to get help from their fellow fan, and where necessary, lift them up too.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at what all his first actions as Mets owner. One, we paid the entire Citi Field staff and all of the employees of the Mets full wages through the end of the year, which is just an amazing act for him to do. Then he's donating $17 million to small businesses in New York affected by the coronavirus, which is amazing. Then he gets the vote. And in his first public statement that he makes about owning the team, the last paragraph he includes is, I hope we get this done soon because free agency starts Sunday and we've got to get to work. And that just makes us all lose our minds. And then the picture of him and his wife hanging out in a custom-made Mets T-shirt and stimulating that Etsy business. I mean, I've said it before, Jamie, and I'll say it again. I think this is going to be more of a coronation than a succession.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like you go, there's no end to this honeymoon in sight. You certainly don't, as a Met fan, you go, you're so preconditioned to go, okay, so what's the ending going to be to this honeymoon? And that's nothing on Steve. That is completely us being defeated Met fans who are cynical and jaded over the years. And I'm sure to some extent, even Steve had to have said somewhere along the lines, hey, this is so Mets. But I think that the fact is, we're starting the free agent season. We've just offered a qualifying offer to Stroman, Brack, and Betances will be back next year on their player options. The team is going to start coming together pretty quick. I can't wait until the sale finalizes and we get that first first press conference from Steve Cohen, because I guarantee you, and I'm not saying this, even vaguely politically, I'm going to find it way more interesting than whoever makes an inaugural speech in January. This is the inauguration for me. I mean, this is the inauguration of the new owner, especially because it really is a once in a lifetime thing. This is a once in a lifetime moment for many Mets fans. And while I vaguely remember the last ownership change in the sense of the Doubleday and Wilpon buying the team back in 1980, this is the one that sticks in my head. This is the one I'm going to remember. And so I cannot wait to hear him lay out his vision and his ideas and his plans for this ball club.
Agreed. I totally think it's going to be great because I think he will be putting it all out there for the fans. I think all those times that we wanted to hear from the Wilpons and we didn't, I don't think he'll have that problem here with Cohen. I think he's going to be very proactive on speaking with the fans and staying in communication with them. And he has a chance here to do something that's pretty historic. You know, New York sports teams are a very passionate fan bases, but not much in history did they love the ownership of their teams. Obviously, the Mets love Joan Payson, and for good
Yes.
reasons. She is a legend. I begrudgingly have to say Yankees fans love George Steinbrenner. Not so much the kids, but they love George because he was a very active, a very vocal owner. And I'll give them credit. That was a guy for New York. I feel like Cohen could be one of those owners who, long after his time, we'll look back on lovingly for the time that he spent in New York. I really think like this is just a matter of we got this right, and this was the exact guy that we needed.
It's like that line that's in every cheesy romantic comedy out there. Where have you been all my life? That's
Right.
kind of what I want to say to
Right.
Steve Cohen. I mean, it is. Where have you been, my entire fandom? Because it is a remarkably wonderful day to be a Mets fan. It almost feels like we did win the World Series. In the sense of we'll see how many we win from this. This is the beginning of something cool. And it may still be bumps in the road, sure, but I'm on the road. I am in the car, and I'm all in as a fan, 100% all in on Team Uncle Steve. That's where I am right now, and I feel pretty good about it. I how could you feel bad? I mean, unless you're just that huge of a J-Lo fan, you got to feel pretty good about where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that we landed the guy that we needed. I really have genuinely not seen the phenomenon known as Mets Twitter so unified in my life. And I look back, I joined Twitter in May of 2009, and I've never seen Mets Twitter so unanimously happy, so unanimously in agreement that something really special just happened to our franchise. And quite frankly, something that we've both waited our entire lives to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited too to talk to our guest. We've had him many times before, and we'll have him here again. We've been doing this show, EJ, now for quite a long time, and the audio version. When we first had our next guest, he had just put out his own first book about his website and about his personal journey as a fan. They carry the same name, and we're excited to have him with us because he's become one of our best friends over the years. From Faith and Fear in Flushing, Greg Prince. Sir, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me back. Good to be here.
Well, certainly a not uneventful week in New York Mets history. Certainly one that will go down as a significant turning point, one way or the other. Certainly you can't judge, but we're all optimistic, and I think rightfully so. Talk a little bit about your excitement level and kind of the emotional roller coaster that this ownership change kind of put on you.
Well, it's certainly been long enough. Um, what are we, at least 10 years of Sell the Team has been sort of the backbeat of Mets fandom in one way or another since the Bernie Madoff stuff came to light. And we were teased with it about 9 years ago. And that fell through. And, when things were going reasonably well on the field for a couple of years, It may not have been a priority, but I think it was always sort of lurking in the backs of our minds, for some people in the front of their minds, that this would be a better franchise to root for if it was owned by somebody else. And when we got word about a year ago, even less than a year ago, I guess, that this gentleman, Steve Cohen, had put in a bid and things were in progress, it was exciting. And when it fell apart in February, it was discouraging. But, I think by then the die were cast and we knew something was going to happen, and the story, stayed alive through the summer into the fall. And finally, here we are. And it's as great a day to be a Mets fan, I think, or, a great moment to be a Mets fan that doesn't involve something that happened on the field, or that doesn't involve, hey, we just traded for or signed somebody we really need, because we just signed, in a matter of speaking, somebody we really need off the field. So, this could get played back in a year or two or 5 or 10 and say, my God, what were they thinking? Or what was this guy thinking? That was a disaster, the Steve Cohen era. Thank God it's over with. Or, oh my God, when is he going to sell the team? But, let's try to be slightly optimistic about this. And it feels like a great day to have finally gotten it done.
It's funny when you talk about the highs and the lows. Obviously, we had the low of just being owned by the Wilpons for so long, and then we had the high of this David Einhorn, who I certainly wasn't aware of until he became involved in trying to purchase the team, and then the crushing low to find out he was not, in fact, going to get the team, only to years later now, not only, excuse me, do you get an owner who is significantly wealthier, but you got a guy who is a genuine, passionate fan of the New York Mets organization, a guy who seemingly can't wait to get to work. And I guess, like you say, the best things come to those who wait. And in this situation, it seems like Einhorn not getting the team at the time may indeed end up being the best thing for us Mets fans.
Yeah, it is nice to get somebody on board for whom this isn't an investment, for whom this isn't a business opportunity, for whom it isn't a foot inside the door to whatever circles one needs, and whether it's athletics, whether it's New York. Steve Cohen grew up rooting for the Mets. Steve Cohen goes back to the beginning with this team, and although I'll be the first to acknowledge the roots of the Mets lie in the Giants and the Dodgers, he doesn't go back far enough for that to be his informing experience. And, we've been with a guy whose informing experience was the Brooklyn Dodgers and who never seemed to get over it. And, how that manifested itself is a whole other story. But Steve Cohen is about the Mets. Growing up near Shea Stadium, going to Met games, reacting to the Mets from what we've seen, not as a company, but as a team that he loves and that he wanted this team. I know he went after the Dodgers a few years ago because you want a baseball team, only so many become available. But also remember, he owned a small piece of the Mets when that became available during the David Einhorn era, such as it was. So it's nice to know somebody is on our side. And, you never really got that feeling about the outgoing ownership. They own the Mets, and I'm sure they preferred the Mets to win, but it never felt like, oh my God, this is the most important thing in the world to me, if I can project on what somebody else who I've never met was thinking. It's pretty obvious that Steve Cohen loves the Mets. Not only loves them enough to have bought them, but would still be rooting for them, I'm pretty sure, whether he had bought them or not. And, I've seen other franchises owned by people who are fans of that franchise, and the difference in the presentation and just the foundation of how the team is run is profound. So to get that, to have Steve Cohen in addition to everything else, in addition to resources, in addition to the breath of fresh air that we anticipate, how great is it that somebody who gives a damn about whether the Mets won or lost last night is going to have his finger on the button, as they say.
Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier in the show, EJ and I, was that we have an owner now that appears quite legitimately to be on social media. His wife is also actively involved in social media and has been posting several pictures lately, including the two of them at the 2015 World Series, and appearing to have a genuinely amazing time together, despite the fact it was a game the Mets lost. But my question is this, just kind of looking back at the past, 40 years of Mets history, I really cannot even remember seeing Mrs. Wilpon, Mrs. Katz, Mrs. Doubleday. It just seems like a completely different universe where you almost have this family at the head of the team now, this family that loves the Mets, this family of Met lovers, as opposed to the men in suits.
Yeah, that's a good point. That there is a picture at the groundbreaking for Shea Stadium of, I want to say her maiden name was Kessler. I could be completely wrong on that, so forgive me if I am. But the Judy Wilpon to be, or maybe she already was Judy Wilpon. Doesn't really matter. She worked for the Mets very early on, so there was a rich history there. It doesn't seem like they ever really activated that. Maybe they were shy people. They didn't care whether they were seen all together being the Mets family, as you say. But you go back to the 1969 World Series, where everybody's coming into the clubhouse after the Mets have won, and there's Joan Payson and there's Charles Payson, and you can sense that it's a huge deal to the Paysons, as much as it is to everybody in uniform and everybody who are the men in suits of their days. And listen, you saw Fred and Jeff, swigging champagne in 2015. You saw Fred and Nelson Doubleday sharing the National League trophy in 2000. And if I recall correctly, I think Fred represented ownership in 86 holding up the trophy. Different strokes for different folks and all, but we are in a social media era. We are in kind of a hands-on, despite all the commercials that say contact free, we expect a certain degree of contact, certain degree of communications. And I Fred, again, you don't need to be on Twitter or Facebook or whatever to own a team and do a good job with it. But the difference between Fred, who secluded himself for the most part in recent years, whether that was just a matter of he wasn't as involved anymore or that, he had enough, and Jeff, who picked his spots, and I think he was Jeff from Greenwich on Twitter, and once people realized who that was and started contacting him, his account went private. I would hope that Steve from Connecticut and originally from Great Neck, and then Mrs. Cohen and the whole gang, will remain open. I mean, just this first morning, it became apparent that, hey, this guy is on Twitter, and he started interacting with fans and just saying, hey, let me know what I can do, what you think I should do. And it wasn't perfunctory. I mean, I go back to the sad occasion of Tom Seaver's passing. The Mets issued this very lawyerly statement about what a shame it was, which it certainly was. And I didn't expect anything more out of them, and I didn't think anything of it. And then Steve Cohen has a statement released that came out through various media about how sad he was and about how he remembered the Jimmy Qualls game and how much he loved Seaver. It's like, I have never heard anything like this out of Fred Wilpon or Jeff Wilpon on any occasion, basically. I mean, they would, have a committee designed for them something that said the right thing, and maybe that was just more in their wheelhouse. But a friend of mine had dug up from newspapers.com from 1980 the daily news coverage of Doubleday and Wilpon buying the team. And one of the things I read in there, just since Cohen bought the team, was, Fred Wilpon is a big Mets fan. He goes to 15 or 20 games a year with his son. I was here with my quote oldest son, who would have been Jeff, when they won the World Series, and I want that feeling to come back. And even promised that the Mets would win a World Series in the 80s. So you can't say he didn't deliver way back when. But it was kind of jarring to see that, because this wasn't something they felt it was important enough to put out there. And just knowing that this is what Steve Cohen comes with, that this is sort of, I was going to say value added, but really I think it's more than that. It's at the core of his being, as far as we can tell, and why he wants this team, and to be able to look to that every off season, every season, every time, knock wood, that we're able to go to a ball game again, is something that just, make you want to walk faster to your seat, make you want to turn on the game a little quicker. And I based on that, you can't help but be optimistic.
Well, I think one thing that was always a knock on the Wilpons is there were times when we wanted to hear from them. We wanted to hear from Fred, and that pretty much stopped happening altogether. And then we would even say, okay, well, let's hear from Jeff. We wanted comfort as fans to know that there's a plan at times that we seemed like we might have been a rudderless ship. And I definitely think in these early days of the Cohens that I definitely don't think that we will be crying out for that attention from our owners, attention from daddy and mommy, if you will, as fans. I feel like they'll be very quick to let us know there is a plan, kind of let us know what that plan is. And I don't think that we'll feel very rudderless with them as far as communications directly with the fans.
Yeah, I think he is going to be a public face type of owner, And again, we might find out that, hey, why is this guy so overly involved in the team? Leave it to the baseball people. But and again, to be fair to Wilpon and Doubleday, who I think we have vaunted or vaulted to a certain pantheonic level because he was the alternative to Wilpon in our minds. But neither one of them was really out front as owners, especially the first decade or so, because that's not what owners did, except with a few ostentatious exceptions, the most obvious of them being George Steinbrenner, whose Q rating was not particularly high circa 1980, even though the Yankees were in very good shape for the most part. But this was the guy who was out threatening people and making wild pronouncements and firing managers every other week. And here, we just wanted somebody who wasn't Lorinda de Roulet and the progeny of the late Mrs. Payson and the grand progeny, and of course M. Donald Grant. And we just wanted to sweep that away because that was a whole other issue. And they did it. Doubleday and Wilpon, they held a press conference. They said a few things. They hired Frank Cashin, and they let him do the work. And he was, to the extent that the Mets needed a public face in those days, because for the most part, the team spoke for itself. I think we're in a different era now, that one that the childhood Mets fan in me doesn't necessarily connect with, because whenever people say, if they don't sell the team, I'm out, I'm done. Like, I became a Mets fan not aware of who Joan Payson was. I only found out, I guess, when I would open a yearbook and saw, oh, that's who that lady is. That's nice. And then I went back to not thinking about it until she passed away. And, not until there were issues where you realized, oh, free agency is here and the Mets aren't involved. And that's because it's an ownership that doesn't have the money, doesn't want to spend the money, whatever. And then we get these new guys in 1980. And okay, we're on solid footing now. I'm going to go back to not thinking about it. And really, until Madoff, maybe somewhere before Madoff, because every now and then Fred would kind of step up and be the guy in front, holding a press conference, and that never went well. But overall, it just wasn't an issue, and it didn't seem to become an issue until the last 10, 15 years, which coincided with the rise of social media, which just made people publicly voice their doubts. And I think it gained a critical mass, and we became aware that this was not a 21st century ownership group. And I think what we have now is someone who is of modern times and hopefully will steer us toward the future.
A lot of times, especially through the internet and social media, and we've known each other longer than probably I've known you longer than I've had a Twitter account. I know that much. But the interesting thing I've always found is sometimes you don't have that grasp of history that leads you to believe that some of these Wilpon years have been the darkest of hours. But let's talk about the truest, darkest of hours, the D. Rollet years. Talk about that piece there from when Mrs. Payson passes away to the Doubleday Wilpon purchase in 1980, and how destructive it was for the franchise
Well,
and the franchise.
yeah, and the franchise. Uh, if there's one thing you could say that isn't warm and loving of Joan Payson, is that she did not have a very good succession plan behind her. And I know she, again, let's not speak ill of the departed, because Joan Payson is this grand figure in Mets history, and deservedly so. This is a woman who wanted National League Baseball in New York, who was heartbroken when her National League team, the Giants, moved away, and stepped up, to use that cliche, in 1962 to fund this baseball team. And one of my historical regrets is that free agency didn't exist during the height of Joan Payson's ability to have taken advantage of it, because she was, as far as I understand, but she was trying to get Willie Mays for 10 years. She was only able to get him. I mean, it was impossible to think you could get him, but she would have probably taken, she would have happily taken Henry Aaron off the Braves' hand. She would have grabbed what was left of Stan Musial in 1962 and 63. Unfortunately, when 1975 comes around and she passes away after being ill for a couple of years, the franchise was left essentially in the hands of M. Donald Grant, her chairman of the board, who I guess she had enough trust in to let, I always, think of him as her bag man, basically, take the money to the bank, Don. But, he had real control of the franchise for a couple of years. And as you implied, that did not go well when it came to the franchise, to Tom Seaver. I think we're all familiar with, the story of Seaver's departure. But even in the wake of that, you've traded your best player ever, still in his prime. And, the franchise, lowercase, is in ruins under Grant. And then when Lorinda De Roulet, Joan's daughter, kind of pushes him out, it doesn't get any better, because there isn't the money to spend. I think there was the wherewithal. I remember in the off season, heading into her first year as chairman, I guess the title would have been, or certainly an active role. She said, we're going to go out and try to sign Pete Rose, who was the big free agent of that winter. And they didn't have enough to sign Pete Rose, certainly to Pete Rose's satisfaction. And it was, made for a nice headline or two. But they never had the resources to compete, even if they wanted to, even if they had the ability to plan out what a baseball team should look like. And quite frankly, Linda, or Lorinda, she went by both, still around, and her daughters had, no clue as to how to run the Mets, to run a National League franchise in New York. And it showed on the field. It was the one full season in Mets history where the Mets did not draw 1 million fans. They lost nearly 100 games for the third year in a row. There was the one thing that I always find different about when we inevitably come back to comparing terrible eras in Mets history, leaving out the very first few years, because I wasn't around for those, and everybody kind of gives them a pass because, hey, 7 years later they were world champions. is that when you look back at the early 90s, which were horrible years, you look back at the early 2000s, which were horrible years, and you look at parts of the 2010s, which weren't too great, there was always at least talent on the roster, even if it had kind of curdled a little bit, but you couldn't say they weren't paying at least somebody. There wasn't a few players who should have been doing better. 1977, 78, 79, there was nobody on the roster. I mean, with hindsight and with loyalty, you love them and you speak highly of them. And gosh, I remember, you guys could fill in the names as easily as I could, but they had nobody. And that's why the ownership under Deroulet and her daughters and, just the residue of M. Donald Grant, even though he was gone in 79, that was the low point of the franchise. On the field, off the field, there was just no hope. Nobody ever talked about the Mets. Even in 93, which was horrific, at least they were, a train wreck. You keep your eyes on a train wreck for at least a few days, and then, they went back to being at the bottom of the standings. So, there's no overstating what a wreck, to use that word again, the New York Mets were, the ones that Doubleday and Wilpon came in to rescue in 1980. And I don't think we've ever gotten down to that point again. And God help us if we ever get down to that point again. And again, there have been bad years, there have been bad periods, but that was just insanely bad. And to have taken that as a starting point in 1980 and to have built up over a 7-season span to become world champions is something that really should not be overlooked. And how much of that was Fred Wilpon, how much of that was Nelson Doubleday, how much of that was just Frank Cash, and how much of it was the manager they brought in, Davey Johnson, and the great players, and whoever, the scouts and the people directing the farm system. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people were involved. But, you have to. That's why I can never completely get on the, oh my God, Fred Wilpon is the absolute worst train, because I'd seen the absolute worst and I knew what followed. And to whatever extent that Wilpon was involved, that's, a feather in his cap. It has nothing to do with Jeff, mind you. But, 77, 78, 79 was the low point for the franchise, to the point where you got the idea that there wasn't a franchise. There was just something called the Mets, and they happened to play games, and you were one of the few people in your demographic group that paid attention to them.
And they had a mule.
And they had a mule. And you know what? If the Mets were winning, it would be like, hey, we've got a mule. Isn't that great? And it was just another one of those many things that just played badly because the Mets played badly and the ownership played badly. So, those were rough days. And, I guess the disappointment, just to in a very broad sense, because I don't want to go too far here, is that I think once we passed that, once we had the rebuilding under Cashin, under Wilpon and Doubleday, or really Doubleday and Wilpon, we figured that was all behind us. Hey, we came through the worst of it. Now we're this really good team and this really solid organization, and life is always going to be pleasant. And we would learn repeatedly that things kind of ebb and flow and run in cycles. And, I think I don't know what it's like for fans of other teams, but it somehow seems like whenever we hit one of those lows, it feels like we're never getting out of it. More so than it feels like when we're doing well, that this is going to last forever, which is the way I felt circa 1986. Maybe like once we got to the late 90s, I figured, okay, now it's behind us, because we went through another period, but now we know how not to live. But it keeps coming back and up and down. So I guess what we have to do now is just kind of trust that under Steve Cohen and the people who will lead the organization, the short and long term, that there will be probably some bad years, but we're not going to get stuck there. And somebody's going to be working their damnedest to make sure we're not stuck there. And I think that in the end may turn out to be the most encouraging thing about this.
Well, as we kind of look through the years and we come by to the point where Doubleday leaves the picture forcibly, it's also basically about the same time that Jeff Wilpon comes into the picture. And I want to spend some time looking at that era, which takes us almost up to present day. It takes us up to about 3 days ago. But I want to take a look at that and spend some time with it. Will you come back and join us again?
Absolutely.
Sweet. Greg Prince, the site is Faith and Fear in Flushing. For those who don't know about the site, tell folks what they can expect.
Faithandfearandflushing.com, what we call the blog for Mets fans who like to read, is just completed its 16th season, written by myself and my friend Jason Fry. We write about the Mets. We write about the experience of being Mets fans. We write about Mets history. We write longer, probably, than many of our fellow bloggers. We haven't really kept up with the times in terms of the idea of being multimedia or putting things into a nutshell or changing our layout for that matter for a long time. But if you want to read about the Mets, you want to read the thoughts of two people who sit around thinking about the Mets most of the time, that's us.
Fantastic. I read it regularly. I recommend it. It is one of those sites that I always feel like a smarter fan after I've read it. And it's also one of those that kind of makes me go, for everything I thought I knew. All right, there's some more knowledge. So I always appreciate it. I joke that I was, before I read your site, I was probably half the fan that I am today. So it is a greatly appreciated blog. Maybe it's not for everybody, but it should be.
No, thank you. And I apologize for making you twice the Mets fan you were.
It's twice the heartache. Yeah, you should be sorry. Greg Prince, we'll talk again soon.
Great.
Always great to talk to Greg, and we'll have him back either next week or the week after. We'll just have to see when that press conference I mentioned earlier will be, when that waiting on the last piece of the puzzle. It is just a formality, folks, and that's the deal to actually close legally and the money to be exchanged, and that is coming up in the next 10 days or so, according to Steve via Twitter. I know they're pushing for it sooner because they want to get rolling. So if it happens between now and next Sunday, we'll have probably a more timely guest, and we'll have Greg in 2 weeks. But if it doesn't, we'll have Greg back with us next week. So that was that. If you've enjoyed today's show, make sure you subscribe below, please. It helps us greatly. Click like as well, because let's be honest, EJ's rocking the beard. So if you like the beard, click like. Go with that. Seriously, if you're enjoying the show, please click like. You can find EJ at the Happy Recap on Twitter. You can find me at The Real Hoove. And if you want to send us an email anytime during the week, thehappyrecap@gmail.com. We welcome suggestions. We welcome topic suggestions, guest suggestions. If you have questions, anything feedback, all that is greatly accepted and encouraged. So we appreciate that as well. EJ, any final thoughts, sir?
No, it's just great to talk to Greg. If there's one guy I wanted to talk to, it's someone who has been through all the ownership changes in his lifetime. He's been with this team from the beginning, and he managed to really kind of fill us in on his thoughts on this new day in Mets baseball. And that's exactly what it is. It's a new day, and you could argue that we might be getting ready to enter what will be the best era of Mets baseball. That remains to be seen.
It's one of those things that at some point down the road, we'll have to start a poll on Twitter. Who was the least favorite Met mascot of all time, Metal the Mule or Jeff Wilpon? But seriously, we certainly are excited about the future. We're excited to have Greg with us. A lot of good background, and we will be back next week with another show, and we'll certainly have all the latest information and some great interviews throughout the off season, and definitely looking forward to the off season of shows. Again, subscribe below, like below, really appreciate it. And let us know on Twitter that you're listening. We'd love to hear that as well. Until next week, let's go, Steve.